Hey everybody, Justin with VMP here. I've got our trusty display engine next to me and I want to talk with everybody about our tin rib kit. Previously we've had a video on the Odin 8 and tin rib kits. Now this is a product we've been making for years. We've recently entirely redesigned it to support the power levels that the 2650 and the upcoming 3100 are capable of. And this means better bearings, better bracketry, more rigidity, just everything you're going to want to have a trouble-free product that performs on the racetrack and on the street. With that being said, this product is very modular. It's going to use a lot of similar parts between our other kits for the Odin, for the new Shelby GT500. Everything's interchangeable, which I think is really good for the consumer because they can buy parts and pieces along their modification journey. They can switch later on and not have to rebuy everything. What you see here would be called a tin rib upgrade kit because it uses the standard no grind FEAD bracket that holds the two idlers right here. One of the things I want to touch on is that we market this as a Gen3R tin rib kit because Gen3R is our latest and current product for the 11 to 17 Coyote. The tin rib kit will work with any of the previous generation VMP superchargers such as the original Gen 3, the Gen 2R, the Gen 2, even the Gen 1. To add some additional layers of complexity, but to be complete, this will also work with the Roush supercharger kits. However, you have to machine the nose drive. And let's be honest, at this day and age, the old 2.3 liter superchargers are so far surpassed by the performance of the 2650s and Gen 3 and Gen 3R form that you're just really going to want to get this blower before you even mess with this belt drive stuff. This belt drive is for the consumer looking to make 900 to 1200 rear wheel horsepower. With giving you some background for what this is, what it fits, I'm going to go into some of the similarities and some of the differences. All of VMP's 8 and 10 rib kits use this latest design balancer that we worked with ATI on. The inertia ring is in the back pulley, so that keeps the weight close to the front main bearing, keeps the stress off the crank. It also makes it a lot easier to work on because the hub goes on first, the supercharger drive pulley goes on, and then the accessory drive pulley goes on. From there, you've got the AC pulley. Our supercharger systems use the belt drive on the Coyote closest to the front cover, and the AC pulley basically functions as an idler. We have had to account for differences in generations of AC compressors. At this point, we have 11 to 17 Coyote, both Mustang and F-150 are the same. We only make a tin rib AC pulley for 11 to 17, just to simplify things. When you get into 18 plus, we make an 8 rib version and a tin rib version, and there's also an F-150 8 rib version because Ford made it different between the F-150 and Mustang starting in 2018. From there, our tensioner setup is the same. This idler pulley is either an 8 or 10 rib. And as I was saying, everything is based on the no grind FEAD bracket, and then we do upgrades from there. When you get a full FEAD kit from us, you're going to be getting an upgraded upper bracket. And the full FEAD kits are really good for people that are just starting from scratch. They don't previously have a 6 rib belt drive. The upgrade kits are good for people that already have this bracket or maybe already invested in an Atlas or a bomber bracket. Our full FEAD kits are going to come with this bomber bracket if you're working on a Gen3R. If you're working on an Odin, they're going to come with the Atlas bracket. The big feature of this is that there is an adjustable idler to get better belt wrap on the supercharger pulley. And it's adjustable to both take up the belt and to accommodate for different size supercharger pulleys. Larger pulleys on the blower just have more wrap by nature of being larger. They have more surface area. And as they get smaller, the area is less and less, the geometry changes, so this sliding idler lets you take that into account. In this video, I'm going to show you how to install and set up this bracket in place of the basic no grind FEAD bracket here. so I want to talk a little bit about our basic no grind FEAD bracket. This has also been called the boomerang bracket. And then our bomber bracket, which is the more advanced version. We have made some changes over the years. Currently, the no grind FEAD bracket uses this bolt, and this bolt. Now, with the bomber bracket, that changes a little bit. We still use this same bottom bolt on the front cover, this bolt on the front cover. We also add a pickup point here, and we utilize the original Roush style pickup point on the lower intake, which I'm going to go into more detail later. The purpose of dropping the water pump mounting point on the latest boomerang bracket is just to make things more consistent. We have found that aftermarket water pumps can be of different heights. They can require shimming. This unit is so rigid and has so many mounting points. It's actually got 5 mounting points, even with the removal of this one, that let's just take this variable out of the equation and not worry about it. So when you're running a 6-rib configuration, this boss does not have to be ground. The 6-rib idlers are narrower, they clear this boss. However, when you run the 8 and 10 rib configuration, you do have to grind this boss down about 1/8 to 1/4 of an inch. You can grind it, you can cut it, and that's going to give you clearance for the wider idler pulleys that are necessary. And as you can see with that clearancing, the idler pulley has got room to spin and not hit this boss. I'm going to go ahead and install the bomber bracket. I want you to notice that this pickup point goes to here, this bolt hole goes to here, and these all land on the front cover. So you always want to start with the front cover bolts. Something else worth noting, all of these bolts are the exact same length. Now, this is where everybody gets excited, especially if they're using power tools and they just want to drive all these in. You've got to stop, slow down, and tighten them in the correct order. First thing we want to do is just get them snug. If we were working on a real engine, there is a ground point right here that you'll want to transfer over to this new bolt. Start with the bottom bolt. You're going to want to tighten that first. And I'm actually going to do this in stages because the gasket on the front cover actually compresses as you do this and it just feels a little funky. So this is our second point to tighten. And this is our third point. Now I'm going to go back around actually and hit 1, 2, 3 again. The purpose of doing 1, 2, and 3 first is that the front cover is the most accurate part in the whole system because everything else is attached to the front cover. So this is going to make sure that the bomber bracket is straight and square and everything is good. And then finally, I'm going to do the fourth point that attaches to the engine block, which also tends to be a very, very consistent point. Like I mentioned, the latest version of the bomber does not use the water pump mounting point because we've got so many other points here. The next thing I want to talk about is installing this bolt. This is a longer bolt. There's a series of spacers and washers, and that is because the washers are supplied because the supercharger in the lower intake is sometimes in a different position front to back. And I think where a lot of people get into trouble is they don't respect the spacers and they just put everything together, they tighten it up, and this bracket ends up, crooked. It has to be on the same plane as the rest of the front cover or you'll run into problems. So I'm actually going to change the camera angle and show you how to put this together. So we got our spacers and one shim installed up here, and I did have to loosen this and this just a hair to get the shim in there. I'm going to go through at the bottom, check that, check that, Now that everything's snugged up and tight, we can go ahead and install our idlers here. So the tin rib idlers have an offset bearing because it's a double row bearing. The deep side goes in, the side with the clip faces out. So this is the low profile bolt. You have to use a bolt like this or a bolt like this in the lower pulley. These have been both 8 and 10 millimeters. This bracket is 10. So this is the water pump pulley we supply with all of our kits. It has the back lip cut off, and that is to clear this idler right here. This is only required on the 8 and 10 rib kits. Our 10 rib kit for the Coyote uses the same 10 rib pulleys as our Shelby GT500 superchargers. You just have to install this spacer behind the supercharger pulley. This is 140 thousandths of an inch thick. It's equivalent to 1 rib of a belt. Occasionally, due to that pesky lower intake manifold variable that I mentioned earlier, you may need an extra 35 thousandths shim. So we include this with the kits as an option. And I'm going to show you how to check alignment on everything. Supercharger pulley installed. I'm going to back off our adjustable idler. We've got everything else in place. I'm going to go ahead and install the supercharger belt and talk about alignment. This is roughly the gap that you need. I could go a little bit tighter here, but this is a safe amount of gap to keep the belt from touching itself. It will flap quite a bit at wide open throttle. I also want to talk about having the right belt length and the right amount of travel in the tensioner. You basically want to set up your belt length, this, and your tensioner to where the tensioner is almost entirely bottomed out, because what will happen on a wide open throttle pull is this belt will stretch and this tensioner will use almost all of its travel taking up the belt stretch. Let's take a look at this tensioner real quick. There's a plate on the back of it called the tensioner rotation plate. There's actually 2 sets of holes in it, and those are different depending on what size balancer you're using, because when you go to crank the tensioner down, you can actually hit the balancer. So for a stock size balancer, you're going to use this set of holes. For the 20% overdrive on this kit, and even a 10% overdrive too, you're going to use the other set of holes. This is going to put it in a nice up angle to give you all that travel. We've got our tensioner rotation plate in the 10-20 position. When you install this tensioner, you want to make sure that this pin goes right here. This gets you the full swing, full travel of the tensioner. There are several reasons that people have belt problems. One of the biggest ones is using too long of a belt, because once that tensioner runs out of travel, the belt goes slack and it tends to jump around, jump over the edges, and just cause all kinds of problems. And one of the things that'll happen is when a belt has jumped, when it goes back, it snaps. And the way to avoid those belt issues is having the right length belt, not too long, and the tensioner being able to do its job and take up all the stretch in the belt. We've got all of our 10 rib kit installed, and I talked about how important installation of the bomber bracket is and alignment of it and keeping it parallel to the front cover of the engine. The other challenge is getting the supercharger pulley in the right place. Sometimes it does need that extra shim. The easiest way to figure that out is to look at the belt from the side. And something you're going to notice is whether this belt here coming off of the supercharger is either behind this belt or in front of this belt. So this belt could be shifted back or it could be shifted forward. And that's going to give you an indication of where your alignment problem is. If this belt is shifted backwards, you actually need a shim to bring the supercharger pulley out. It's almost kind of a reverse logic, but it has to do with the fact that the belt is running up and over the pulley and down to the balancer, and this pulley is controlling the alignment as it comes off, and it's incorrect, right? So that's why it needs to come out. The most important thing with belt alignment and avoiding issues when you get on the dyno or on the track is just paying attention to everything. In our other videos, we specify actual measurements off of the crank snout and off of the front cover so you can make sure your balancer is on all the way. Balancers that aren't installed all the way will always cause problems with belt alignment. Other little culprits for belt alignment issues: if someone puts the ground between the bracket and the front cover, that's going to cause an alignment issue because we designed this to all be, perfectly straight with no extra things back here. Something we see as well with superchargers that have been used, shipped, handled a lot, this shaft can actually get pressed in farther to the supercharger, as much as a 1/16 of an inch, and your packaging can look like it was not damaged at all, but the weight of the supercharger, if the UPS drops it on the nose, will actually press this in. So these are just some things to check. The end-all be-all for me when I'm working on this stuff is looking at this thing from an angle, having someone else start up the car, and me watching the belt and seeing if it jumps and seeing which way it jumps, kind of using some backwards logic to figure out what is influencing the system to have an alignment issue, because it's usually slightly different than what it looks like at first glance, because you've got that rotation factor of the belt coming up and then wanting to follow. The belt is both led by these idler pulleys a little bit, but it's almost more affected by stuff down the chain, pulling or pushing, than it is by what's on the feed side, if you can kind of follow what I'm saying there. One other thing I want to touch on with our 8 and 10 rib kit installations: this AC pulley must be shimmed correctly. We supply a little package of shims. There's also some shims in the factory one. When you take it apart, you want to use a combination of the factory shims and our shims to shim this correctly. The air gap must be 20 to 25 thousandths. A smaller air gap is not better. It is actually worse. When that magnet comes on, the clutch face actually needs a little bit of a running head start to make a good grip on this surface here. And this is something we've worked really hard to design, is an updated AC clutch pulley. That's actually why the 8 and 10 rib kits have taken so long. We had to go through all the magnetism studies, and what we ended up at is actually applying a Grip Tech finish to the surface of the AC clutch pulley the same way we would to a supercharger pulley. So we worked with Grip Tech on that. That was awesome. Like anything, it's not an end-all be-all if it's not installed properly. So make sure you get that air gap correct. One other thing we have noticed, some of these cars are higher mileage and they may have aftermarket replacement parts. Our AC pulley is designed to work with the Ford OEM compressor. We cannot guarantee fitment with aftermarket compressors. We've seen them actually change the bearing size. We've seen them change everything. And you should have a good, relatively flat, not too badly worn AC clutch face that you are installing. If you don't have one that is in good condition, then you can buy an AC clutch kit from Ford and use just the face to go with our 8 and 10 rib AC pulleys. Wrapping this up here, please remember to check out our 10 rib Odin installation kit video. That's going to cover the bottom half of this. For the bomber bracket, we have detailed written instructions for both the 6 rib and the 8 and 10 rib versions of this. That also covers installation with the Roush style FEAD system if you're upgrading from that. Make sure you like, subscribe, and share. I'll see you next time.